Hey, I haven't done a video in quite a while now, so I thought I'd do one today. It's a dismal afternoon and dismal Sunday afternoon in Calgary. Pretty foggy out there. It's the day after the NDP leadership convention, and I thought, what better time to speak about democracy than right now? Because I'm quite concerned and quite pissed off with the way our democratic process is going in Canada. More negative ads coming out towards Bob Rae. I understand they're already getting ready for negative ads on Tom Mulcair, and congratulations to Tom for winning the leadership of the NDP. Just thought I'd throw that out there. It's actually, I find it quite interesting now that we have the leader of the NDP as a former Liberal. We have the leader of the Liberals who's a former NDP. And Mulcair is a former Liberal, making it very, very clear there will not be any alignments with the Liberals. And then we have Stephen Harper, the head of the Conservative Party, who used to be the head of the Alliance Reform parties. Both Alliance and Reform, until they amalgamated, quite intent on breaking Canada up. Here's a man that wrote the manual on how to disrupt Parliament, and yet we've given him our country to him, and he's slowly eroding every democratic process we have out there. So let's get started here. You know, I watched the NDP leadership convention off and on all day yesterday between the women's curling and a very poorly played hockey game by the Calgary Flames. And I must say I was pretty impressed with the level of democracy they used to elect their leader. One person, one vote. I agree with that. I also checked the news and saw the story on the new ad that the Conservatives are going to be running regarding Bob Rae as the leader of the Liberal Party, and going back to his time 17 years ago, pretty well, of when he was the Premier of Ontario, and what a terrible job he did. Well, you know, people hopefully mature and change as they move through their career. But with that said, let's take a look at Stephen Harper's past as well. We want to go back and see how things were. Well, let's go back and see how things were. And this is even more recent, because this is from the Alberta Agenda, which was published in the National Post January 27th, 2001. And it was an open letter to Ralph Klein by 6 prominent Albertans: Stephen Harper, Tom Flanagan, Ted Morton, Raynard Knopf, Andrew Crooks, and Ken Bosanquet. The Alberta Agenda promoted the idea of Alberta going off on its own by creating its own Alberta pension plan, collect its own revenue from provincial or personal provincial income taxes, and establish its own provincial police force. The RCMP would remain to police federal statutes. Alberta, as it says, Alberta would be better served if they did these 3 things for themselves. They would also send a clear signal to Ottawa that they will no longer be treated as a colony of central Canada. Now, this is from a guy who denigrated the Bloc for years about wanting to break up Canada. When Mr. Harper was involved with the Alberta Agenda and a few other bodies he's been involved with, he also wanted to break up Canada. So, you know, say what they may about Bob Rae, and I could care less one way or the other. It's just, I really get tired of this negative advertising and taking old, antiquated information and trying to put it into context of today. So I'm going to do a bit of that as well. All right, here we go on Mr. Harper. I've just given you one example, so I'm going to look at a few more. One of the nice things about living in a democracy, the last time I looked, Canada was still considered a democracy, but there are times when I begin to wonder. But the nice thing about a democracy is you can say what you think, but, you know, within reason, and it needs to be based on some fact. What I really dislike, though, is the hypocrisy that tends to go along with it. And in light of the NDP Leadership Convention yesterday, I thought I'd raise this one as well. And this is a quote from Mr. Harper when he was the Vice President of the National Citizens Coalition, and at a meeting for the Council of National Policy, a body that's referred to as a right-wing American think tank. It was held in Montreal in 1977. This was one of his statements to that meeting. And again, I quote, "The NDP could be described as basically a party of liberal Democrats, but it's actually worse than that, I have to say. And forgive me jesting again, but the NDP is the kind of proof that the devil lives and interferes in the affairs of men." Wow, that's a pretty damning statement as far as I'm concerned. So that comment about the NDP is just an example of the contempt Mr. Harper has for our government and our country. It really kind of pisses me off every now and then. Another example of the contempt he holds for Canadians in general. And if we're going to go back into our past, let's look at our past, Mr. Harper. This was an indication of the type of contempt he held the average Canadian in. And this was at a presentation he did when he was then Vice President of the National Citizens Coalition. Again, it was in June of 1997 in Montreal, where he was presenting at a meeting of the Council for National Policy, a right-wing American think tank. Again, that's the second time I think I've mentioned that. But this was his quote. This is how much respect he has for Canadians when he's talking to Americans or others. And I quote, "I was asked to speak about Canadian politics. It may not be true, but it's legendary that if you're like all Americans, you know almost nothing except for your own country, which makes you probably knowledgeable about one more country than most Canadians." End of quote. You know, that's a pretty denigrating comment to make about Canadians. And just another idea of the level of contempt he holds us in as everyday Canadians. Here's a little ditty that I found quite interesting, especially in light of the recent issue with Christian Paraday and his problems with the Ethics Commissioner. You know, speaking of morals again, and this was Mr. Harper, Stephen Harper, defending Betty Granger. Betty had been one of Mr. Harper's leadership organizers in Manitoba in 2002. Prior to that, Ms. Granger had run as a candidate for the 2000 election, and she created a bit of controversy that year with a comment about Asian invasion. And that was 2000. In the Calgary Herald, January 15th, 2002, this came up, and Stephen Harper's defended Betty. This was his defense, and again I'm quoting from the paper, and I quote, "I'm not doing witch hunts on people's pasts. If someone does something wrong, there will be action taken. But if somebody doesn't do anything wrong, we're not going to take any action. I don't make volunteer field decisions." He's referring to Miss Granger. "But Betty Granger is a riding president, a member in good standing. She's somebody that other members I've talked to think very, very highly of, and quite frankly, she was the victim of an unfair slur story in the last election campaign." End of quote. Now, that's Stephen defending her. That being the case, why are we witch hunting Mr. Ray? I'd like to interject another little quote here from Mr. Harper at this particular point before I ask my next question. And this was a comment made by Stephen Harper when he was leader of the opposition in support of the American invasion of Iraq, House of Commons, April 1st, 2003. And I quote, Mr. Speaker, the issue of war requires moral leadership. We believe the government should stand by our troops, our friends, and our allies and do everything necessary to support them right through to victory. End quote. I really want to stress the part there about morals. Because, Mr. Harper, if we're going to talk about morals, then what are you doing? What are you going to do about Mr. Paradis? He's already been found in breach of ethics by the ethics commissioner. You're the one that preached ethics and morals. What are you going to do about Mr. Paradis besides tell us, well, the embarrassment, he'll learn from that? That's not ethical or morally responsible, Mr. Harper. Anyway, I just wanted to throw that in there. You know, and although I'm not a huge supporter of negative ads, apparently they work. So let's take a look at this one. This was the Stephen Harper in 2001, and this is a quote from the Report News magazine. This is the type of contempt he feels for, or that he will show when somebody upsets him. This is a direct quote. You have to remember, and I quote, by the way, you have to remember that west of Winnipeg, the ridings the Liberals hold are dominated by people who are either recent Asian immigrants or recent migrants from Eastern Canada, people who live in ghettos and are not integrated into the Western Canadian society. Now, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but that sounds a little bigoted to me. Mr. Harper, are you still... Well, I'm running out of sunlight, and I started this morning. So I'm going to wind her down here, but I may do more of these. But this is just sort of a message to everybody out there, and to you, Mr. Harper. You know, we're paying attention. You may have a lot of money to put into your negative ads. Imagine if the internet, if social media gets together, and you have 100,000 of us finding your quotes and putting them in our context online. There's a citizen's way to do negative advertising very cheaply. Is that what you want to go up against? Let's start playing the game a little cleaner, okay? Thank you, sir, and thank you to everybody else. Check you later. Bye-bye.